Hey everyone. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. That way YouTube will keep showing you more stories just like this one. Alright, let's get started. I've been a paramedic in Indiana for a little over 3 years now. It's not the kind of job you ever get comfortable with. There's always something waiting to throw you off balance. But what happened last spring at St. Mary's Medical Center in Evansville was unlike anything I'd ever faced, and it still haunts me. At the time, I was finishing my second year. My partner Jordan was an EMT with more than 15 years on the job. He'd been around long enough to know every shortcut in the city, every hospital protocol, every face in the ER. Working with him was like having a built-in map and encyclopedia. He didn't talk much unless he had to, but when things went sideways, he always knew what to do. That Friday night in April started like any other shift. We grabbed gas station coffee, checked our rig, and settled in for what we thought would be a typical 12 hours. Around 9, dispatch sent us on our first call, a 74-year-old man with chest pains who needed transport to St. Mary's. That hospital was where we delivered most of our patients, a massive complex built in sections over decades. The original stone building dated back to the 1940s, with glass towers and wings added in the 70s and 90s. The layout was a mess if you didn't know it. We stabilized the patient, got him loaded, and were halfway to the hospital when dispatch came through again with very specific instructions. Cardiac unit, 7th floor, east wing. They're expecting you. That gave both of us pause. Jordan frowned and repeated the order back, asking for confirmation. The response was clear as day. 7th floor, east wing, cardiac team waiting. Now, here's the thing. At St. Mary's, the cardiac unit we knew was on the 4th floor of the main building. I'd been there dozens of times. 7th floor didn't even sound right. But the patient's vitals were stable, so we didn't push it. Maybe they'd opened a new unit we hadn't heard about. When we pulled into the ambulance bay, everything looked normal. Eddie, the security guard who usually cracked jokes at us, just waved us through without a word. We rolled our patient through the familiar fluorescent corridors to the elevator bank. Jordan pressed 7. The doors slid shut, and the panel lit up. We watched the numbers climb. 3, 4, 5, 6. Then 7 dinged, and the doors opened. Instead of a brightly lit hospital corridor, we faced absolute darkness. Not dim light, not a section under maintenance, just a pitch-black hallway. The air hit us instantly, icy cold, at least 20 degrees cooler than the rest of the hospital. There was a smell too, not fresh antiseptic like you'd expect, but stale, old like medical supplies left in a damp closet for decades. Jordan immediately jabbed the close doors button, but elevators never move fast when you need them to. For those 30 seconds, I couldn't help shining my penlight into the darkness. What I saw made my stomach twist. The hallway was lined with gurneys shoved against the walls. Old IV stands with rusting hooks, dust floating in the beam. The walls were painted that faded mint green color you only see in hospitals from the 70s, peeling and water-stained. Our patient began to panic, heart rate spiking on the monitor. "Where are you taking me?" he asked, voice shaking. Jordan was already on his radio, trying to reach dispatch, but all we got was static, something I'd never heard inside St. Mary's. Finally, the doors closed, and Jordan hit 4. We descended. Neither of us spoke for a moment. The look we exchanged was enough. We'd both seen it. We delivered the patient to the real cardiac unit on the 4th floor. The charge nurse, Bethany, got him settled while Jordan pulled me aside. "You want to report that?" he asked. "Report what?" I said. "That an elevator opened on a floor that doesn't exist?" We both knew how insane it would sound. On our way out, Jordan casually asked Eddie if there had been any construction or new units upstairs. Eddie looked at us like we were joking. "East Wing's 6 floors," he said. "Always has been." He added that the 7th floor of the main tower was just administration offices. No patient care. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. The next evening, around 11 p.m., we got another call. Dispatch directed us to transport a stroke patient, destination St. Mary's, 7th floor, East Wing Neurology. Jordan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. We locked eyes. He keyed the radio. Voice steady. "Confirm destination." There was a long pause, static filling the cab. Then dispatch repeated the order exactly. 7th floor, East Wing, Neurology. They have a bed ready. Jordan pushed back harder this time, saying the East Wing only had 6 floors. The dispatcher hesitated, then said she'd double-check. A minute later, she corrected herself. Apologies. 6th floor, neurology. We delivered the patient to the 6th floor. The nurses there took him without issue. But when we asked about the 7th floor, the older nurse at the desk froze. She looked at us for a moment, shook her head, and walked away without saying a word. Sunday night, we had 3 calls back to back. Around 2 a.m., we were transporting a young woman from a car accident. She was conscious but bleeding internally. Time critical. Dispatch came through again. Crystal clear. St. Mary's Medical, 7th floor, East Wing trauma. Jordan cursed under his breath. I wrote the words in my notebook. Time-stamped. Exact phrasing. He radioed back immediately, demanding clarification. This time, dispatch doubled down. They said they had confirmed directly with St. Mary's trauma team, and they were waiting on 7 East. The girl on the stretcher picked up on our hesitation. What's wrong? Where are you taking me? She asked, starting to cry. We arrived at St. Mary's and pushed toward the elevators. My plan was to take her to the ER instead, but when we hit the lobby button, the elevator ignored us. It started moving on its own. The panel lit up. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The doors slid open to that same black corridor. But this time, there was sound. The steady beeping of heart monitors. Not one, not 2. Dozens, all slightly out of sync, echoing down the darkness. Underneath, faint but unmistakable, a voice came through an intercom, calling out room numbers and doctor names I didn't recognize. Our patient broke down, begging us not to take her in there. Jordan jammed his hand in the door to keep it from closing while hammering the emergency button. The cold air rushed over us again, carrying a smell like burned plastic mixed with something organic and rotten. Then, without warning, the doors slammed shut on their own. The elevator lurched downward, taking us straight to the ER level. When the doors opened, 2 security guards were waiting, saying they'd gotten an alert about a stuck elevator. According to their system, it had only been paused for 30 seconds. We rolled the patient into the ER, shaken. Jordan did something I never expected. After we finished our shift, he went to the hospital's administrative office. His cousin worked in facilities and let us look at archived blueprints during her break. What we found made everything worse. There had been a 7th floor East Wing. Built in 1979, it was a state-of-the-art ICU, advertised as one of the best in the Midwest. The paperwork was there. Permits, staffing records, equipment purchases. Then we found a newspaper clipping from August 1987. A summer storm had knocked out power, and the hospital's backup generators failed. The 7th floor ICU lost power for 14 hours. 43 patients on ventilators and life support died that night. The investigation led to lawsuits, massive fines, and ultimately the decision to seal off the floor. They stripped the equipment, walled off the stairwells, removed it from the elevators, and erased it from the hospital's official layout. But here's what chilled me. Jordan's cousin pulled up the current EMS dispatch system. In the drop-down menu for St. Mary's destinations, 7th floor East Wing still appeared, complete with options for different units: cardiac, neurology, trauma. She tried deleting them. Every time they reappeared seconds later. The IT department was called. They traced the source. After a few minutes, the tech got quiet. He said the entries were being generated by user accounts belonging to dispatch operators from the 1980s. Accounts were deactivated decades ago. That Monday night, Jordan and I were on what would become our final shift together. Around 4 a.m., we picked up an elderly man struggling to breathe. Before we even reached him, dispatch had already assigned the destination: St. Mary's, 7th floor East Wing, respiratory unit. We didn't argue. We stabilized him and told dispatch we were diverting to county medical. 15 minutes farther. During the drive, the man grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. His eyes were wide, unfocused. He kept repeating a room number, 7E42. My wife is waiting for me. I need to get to 7E42. Afterward, Jordan looked up the old records. Room 7E42 had been occupied by a woman named Helen Garrett, one of the patients who died in the 1987 blackout. The man's last name was also Garrett. We delivered him to county medical, but he passed away 3 hours later. I transferred to a different company the following week, one that didn't service St. Mary's. Jordan retired early a month later. Before we left, we filed a formal report about the elevator and dispatch issues, recommending a full audit. The hospital's official response: no technical irregularities found. But the 7th floor calls never stopped. Other crews still get them. Dispatch always corrects them now. rerouting to valid units, but those phantom destinations keep appearing in the system. Last month, the hospital announced plans to demolish the East Wing entirely, but construction keeps stalling. The public reason is asbestos. A contractor friend told me the real one. They can't safely access the sealed stairwells. Equipment fails, batteries drain. Workers hear monitor alarms echoing behind the walls. 3 have quit already. I don't know what's still lingering on that floor. Whether it's just ghost data stuck in old systems or something else entirely. All I know is that when the elevator doors opened onto that darkness, and the sound of those monitors filled the air, every instinct in my body told me we were staring into a place where 43 lives ended all at once, and where something still waits, decades later. I need someone to tell me I'm not losing my mind. For the past 6 months, I've been running calls out of a Phoenix station, and something has been happening during my shifts that nobody else seems willing to acknowledge. I'm 34, and I've been in emergency medicine for a decade. I started as an EMT in Las Cruces, worked my way through paramedic school, then moved to Arizona 2 years ago after my mom got sick and my sister needed help with her kids. The work has always been heavy, but I've handled it. I'm the one who keeps my head when the room is loud. My supervisor, Kramer, a 22-year veteran who thinks praise is a waste of oxygen, told me back in January that I was annoyingly unflappable. That confidence has eroded fast. I don't know what I'm seeing. I don't know why it only happens around me. And I don't know how to talk about it without sounding unstable. The first incident was in early March. A little after 3 in the morning, dispatch sent us to a garden-style complex off 19th Avenue, an elderly male with possible cardiac arrest. My partner Luis was driving. We found the apartment door unlocked, and a neighbor waiting in the hall with shaking hands. Inside, a 79-year-old man, Elliot Price, lay on the carpet by the recliner. According to the neighbor, he'd heard a loud thump through the wall and called 911 right away. No spontaneous breathing. No pulse at the carotid. Pupils are wide and unreactive. The monitor showed a systole. We worked the algorithm. Compressions, airway, epinephrine cycling through for 30 minutes. Nothing changed. In the ED at Desert Cross Medical Center, Dr. Cho took one look at the timing and rhythm strips and called it at 3:41 a.m. Nurses started postmortem care. Luis went to restock the drug bag. I stayed to wipe down the pads and pack the defib. That's when I saw Mr. Price's chest rise. It wasn't a reflexive gasp. It was a slow, even inhalation, the kind you see in a sleeping person. One smooth rise, one smooth fall. I grabbed Dr. Cho's sleeve and pointed. By the time she had her stethoscope on his chest, he was still again. She listened for almost a full minute, checked pupils, and checked for any electrical activity on a quick strip. Nothing. Agonal activity can occur after death, she said, calm and firm. You were looking right at him after a long resuscitation. It's not unusual to misinterpret a post-mortem movement. Luis hadn't seen it. His back was turned while he labeled syringes. I told myself I was overtired and moved on. 2 weeks later, it happened again. Middle-aged female, found down in her bathroom by a coworker who came to check on her after she missed a shift. We got pulses back en route, but lost them again in the ED. Dr. Menon pronounced at 11:19 p.m. I stayed at the doorway, finishing the run sheet. 14 minutes after the time of death, the woman's left hand curled, thumb to forefinger, like she was trying to pinch something. The movement lasted 2 or 3 seconds. By the time I crossed the room and called Luis over, her hand was flat again and already cooling. The charge nurse shook her head when I asked if she'd seen it. Luis suggested I schedule an eye exam, and he said it in a way that was meant to be a joke but landed wrong. I bought a small notebook and started writing down everything: dates, case numbers, times, what I thought I saw, and who else was there. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to be the problem medic who needed a fitness for duty exam. On April 5th, we were toned out to a commercial site near the airport. A 28-year-old ironworker, Dylan Hart, had fallen 3 stories, massive head trauma. There was nothing to do except confirm what was obvious. I called the coroner. The foreman cleared the crew away and covered the body with a clean tarp. It was bright, dry, and windless. I stayed with Dylan while Luis spoke with the police. For maybe 30 seconds, Dylan's chest rose and fell in a slow rhythm, 6 or 8 breaths. I watched the anterior chest wall move. I counted aloud. I pulled out my phone and recorded 12 seconds, hands shaking. When I watched the clip at home, nothing moved. The timestamp matched the time in my notes. The angle was the same. The chest was still. I replayed it until the battery died. then lay in bed and stared at the wall until sunrise. The rest of my life was fine. I was sleeping, eating, and making jokes in the bay with the crew. I'd started dating someone, Rainey, a school counselor with zero interest in adrenaline. We went on hikes in South Mountain and ate tacos at a place that only takes cash. I wasn't drinking more than usual. I wasn't losing time. The only change was at work, in tiny windows that nobody else seemed to see. It kept happening. A 64-year-old with a massive MI, a 22-year-old fentanyl overdose we couldn't reverse, an 84-year-old with a hemorrhagic stroke. Always the same pattern. 10 to 30 minutes after the call time, something unmistakably organized, breathing, eye movements, a hand that lifted and settled. Never dramatic, but never random, and never captured on camera. I started wearing a body cam and told Kramer it was for training. I wore it every shift. I reviewed hours of footage. The movements I watched with my own eyes never appeared in the recordings. I swapped partners for a week to test myself. Luis traded me to Aisha, a quiet medic who has handled more arrests than anyone in our district. The first code we ran together was for an elderly woman named Ruth Liang. We worked her to the limit and called it at 9:32 p.m. 5 minutes later, her eyelids began cycling in a pattern I've only ever seen on sleeping patients. Rapid, regular fluttering. It lasted long enough for me to check the wall clock. Aisha stood beside me reviewing med times on the chart. "Do you see that?" I asked. She looked up at Ruth's face and then at me. "See what?" she said. The motion stopped. By May, I had 14 entries in my notebook. Causes of death varied. Locations varied. The only consistent factors were the timing and my presence. I tried to catch the movements with different devices. I set phones at different angles. I put a GoPro on the counter in the kitchen while we waited for the medical examiner. Nothing recorded what I saw. I told Rena, because I needed to say it aloud to someone who didn't carry a radio. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked ordinary questions. How much caffeine? How much sleep? Was I drinking? Did I want her to help find a therapist who specializes in medical trauma? I said yes to the last part, and she made a list. But the next call ended. Any hope that it was stress alone. It was a Saturday night in June. A 41-year-old woman, Elena Brooks, collapsed in her kitchen with sudden shortness of breath. Her 15-year-old son called 911 and let us in when we arrived. We worked her for an hour. We followed the protocol exactly. We didn't get her back. At 11:54 p.m., Dr. Cho pronounced. The son was in the living room with a neighbor. Luis went to the supply room for more saline bags. I asked a nurse for 10 minutes before the body was moved. I set my phone on the counter, angled at the face and chest. I had my body cam on. I borrowed a small camera from a firefighter who was clearing the room and propped it against a box of gloves. At 12:16 a.m., Elena opened her eyes and looked at me. Her mouth formed a shape like the start of a word. Her right hand lifted 3 inches off the sheet and then settled. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the ventilators in the next bay. I didn't move. I didn't speak. After 5 or 6 seconds, her gaze lost focus. Her eyes closed. The lines of her face softened in a way I've seen thousands of times, the way a body settles. Later, at my kitchen table, I watched all 3 videos. No movement appeared on any of them. Time codes matched. Angles covered what I'd been staring at. The only thing in motion was my reflection in a stainless steel panel as I shifted my weight. I called Kramer in the morning and told him I needed to take a leave. I said medical reason, and he didn't ask for details. Luis texted twice that day, once to check on me and once to say that if I needed to talk, he wouldn't repeat it to anyone. Rena came over with soup and printed abstracts about postmortem reflexes, the Lazarus phenomenon, and delayed return of spontaneous circulation. I read them all. None of them fit what I'd seen. Organized, purposeful movements well after a systole, in different pathologies, with cameras recording nothing. I went back through my notes and the hospital charts with a different question in mind. I called the organ donation coordinator at Desert Cross under the pretense of quality improvement. Her name was Kim Huang. She's kind in the way people are kind when they understand you're asking for something you're not allowed to ask for. She confirmed general details that are public, which patients had registered as donors, which went on to procurement, and which organs were transplanted. Every single one of the 14 patients I'd documented was an organ donor. All 14 went to the OR after pronouncement, or in 2 cases, after formal brain death determination. Every set of recovered organs was viable. The coordinator told me, without names, that one of Elena Brooks's kidneys went to a woman in Tucson who had started walking around her unit within a week. I sat in my truck in the parking garage and stared at the steering wheel, until the heat forced me to turn on the air. I couldn't shake the idea that the movements weren't random firings, and they weren't mistakes. They were tied to the moment when a person becomes a donor. They were tied to the interval after we say a name and a time and write it in a chart. I decided to watch a procurement. I know how that sounds. I'm not a relative. I'm not part of the procurement team. But first responders sometimes follow a case to the hospital, and nobody questions a paramedic standing quietly in a hallway if he keeps his badge visible and doesn't get in the way. I still had access from a joint training we'd done with the ED and OR. I still knew the side corridor that led to the observation windows in OR 4 and OR 5. Elena's procurement was scheduled for that night. Brain death had been confirmed 2 days earlier by apnea testing and a second physician's exam. She was still ventilated for organ preservation. The Southwest Donor Network had the team in place. The plan was liver, kidneys, corneas, and possibly heart valves. I told myself out loud that I wouldn't interfere. The organs would save lives. I wasn't there to stop anything. I was there to see if the pattern extended into the operating room. I wrote a note and taped it inside my locker. If nothing happens, call Dr. Patel's office and take the referral Rena found. I put the small camera in my shirt pocket. I checked the battery twice. I told Kramer I might bring back something for training, which wasn't a lie if you define training broadly. Then I drove to the hospital and sat in my truck until 15 minutes before the posted time. Standing in an OR corridor is like standing backstage. There's a hum of air handlers, an antiseptic smell, and the constant movement of people who know their jobs. The donor team moved with quiet efficiency. Nobody spoke loudly, nobody made small talk. A chaplain passed once with a binder and nodded to me. I nodded back. I didn't recognize the surgeon, but I recognized the anesthesiologist from previous transfers. He's the kind who always thanks crews in the hall, even when nobody else does. I stepped back as they rolled Elena past. Her face looked like it had in the ED after we stopped, relaxed and pale under the lights. I pressed my shoulder to the wall and stared at the floor as they pushed the gurney into OR 4. When the doors closed, my stomach dropped like I'd run upstairs too fast. I fought the urge to leave. I told myself one simple rule. If I saw anything, I wouldn't move or speak. If I saw nothing, I would go home, take the referral, and submit to whatever evaluation was necessary to keep me from harming a patient out of hesitation. The procedure started. I could see enough through the observation window to know what phase they were in without needing the details. Once, long ago, I'd watched a procurement during a tour. This looked the same. Monitors steady. Team calm. I stood still. My camera sat against my chest, recording whatever it could see through the pocket fabric and the window glass. I'm not going to write what I thought I saw as they began the first incision because I don't trust my words right now. If I describe it, I'll start to believe my description. What I can say is that my body reacted as if something had moved in front of me, though nothing changed on the monitor outputs, and nobody in the room altered their actions. I didn't gasp. I didn't knock on the glass. I pressed my hands flat against the wall until my arms shook, and I kept my eyes open because I needed to know if it would happen again. An OR nurse stepped into the hall a few minutes later to grab a tray. She smiled the way medical people smile at each other in hallways, an acknowledgement without conversation. I nodded back and understood, very clearly, that none of this was about me. Whatever was happening was not an invitation. It wasn't a message. It wasn't a test that I could pass or fail. I left when they announced cross-clamp time. I walked to the stairwell, sat on a concrete step, and listened to the noise of the building. The recordings on my pocket camera would later show a shaky view of my shirt buttons and a blurred rectangle of light through the window. They would not show what my brain insists happened. I know this because every other attempt to catch it has failed. Back at home, I opened my notebook and copied the last 6 months into a clean document. I wrote dates, patient initials, causes, times of death, times of movements, who else was present, and where the patient later went for procurement. The pattern is there in black and white, even if it means nothing to anyone else. I'm not writing this to convince anyone to change policy. I'm not a researcher. I'm not a crusader. I'm a medic who recognizes a rhythm when it repeats. I don't think this is the Lazarus phenomenon. I don't think it's muscle twitching. I don't think it's a trick of air in the chest cavity, or a misread of shadows under fluorescent lights. I think it is something that only becomes visible for a few minutes to one person who happens to be looking. Maybe it's a defect in me. Maybe it's a sensitivity. Maybe it's a cruel trick of stress on a brain that has spent a decade counting compressions and timestamps. If it's an illness, I'll treat it. If it's not, I'm leaving this here for the one other person who recognizes themselves in it. To anyone in EMS, ED nursing, surgery, procurement, or the ME's office, have you ever seen something you will not write in a chart? Something you told yourself was a shadow or a reflex because there was no place for it in the protocol? I can't be the only one. There have to be others who noticed and stayed silent because the system has no checkbox for unexplainable motion after pronouncement. I start leaving tomorrow. Rena found a specialist who sees healthcare workers. Kramer said he'd hold my spot if I wanted it. Luis sent a photo of the bay and told me it looked weird without my clutter on the counter. Kim from Donation emailed a generic thank you to all first responders on a recent case, and I stared at the line about the gift of life until the words stopped meaning anything. If the recordings from tonight show nothing, if the pocket camera proves again that every movement I witness is a private hallucination, I'll check myself in and follow instructions. If there's even one frame that reflects what I saw, I'll hand it to Kramer and let him decide who should see it next. Either way, I won't be walking into another living room with a monitor bag until this is resolved. I've spent my career trying to drag people back from the edge with pressure and drugs and timing. Maybe the only thing I have to do now is the opposite: stand still and watch, and admit that there's a part of this job that doesn't belong to us. Tonight, I'll know for sure. I worked as a paramedic in Springfield, Missouri for just over 10 years, and in that time I thought I had seen everything a night shift could throw at me. Car wrecks, overdoses, gunshots, elderly folks slipping quietly away in their beds. But in March of 2021, something happened that convinced me there are things out there that no amount of training can prepare you for. My partner at the time was Melissa, a tough-as-nails EMT who had been in the service for nearly 2 decades. We'd been paired up for almost 5 years, and by then we had a rhythm. She drove most of the time. I managed the back. We traded dark jokes between calls, and we both knew when the other needed space. That month had been bitterly cold, the kind of weather where the wind seemed to slice through every layer you wore. The city had just gotten hit with another round of freezing rain, so roads were slick and our shifts were stretched thin. It was a Tuesday night, about 11:40 p.m. Melissa and I had just finished a late dinner at the station, microwaved leftovers when dispatch called in with a code 3 cardiac arrest. The address given was 739 Ashgrove Lane. Melissa punched it into the onboard GPS, and that's when the first odd thing happened. The system flagged the address as invalid. The screen literally flashed red. No such address. Not unusual by itself. Sometimes the database lagged behind new developments, but Ashgrove Lane wasn't new. It was an older residential street on the east side, mostly ranch-style houses built in the 70s. We knew it well. Dispatch repeated the address, firm this time, 739 Ashgrove Lane. Male, approximately 72, unconscious, CPR in progress by spouse. Melissa and I exchanged a look, but rolled out anyway, lights and sirens cutting through the icy night. When we arrived, we found ourselves parked between 737 and 741. There was no 739. Where the number should have been was an empty lot, half hidden by a chain-link fence sagging under the weight of ice. Dead grass poked up through patches of snow. No house, no lights, no signs of life at all. I radioed dispatch, told them the property was vacant. They came back sharp, negative. The caller identified herself as Eleanor Miller. Reporting husband, Richard Miller, age 72, cardiac arrest. She's still on the line. She says she can see you outside. Melissa and I froze. We were standing in front of an empty field, breath steaming in the air, flashlights catching nothing but weeds. Yet dispatch was adamant that the woman could see us from her window. Then they patched the call audio directly into our unit. And I heard her, a woman's voice, trembling, gasping between words. Please hurry. My husband, he's not breathing. I'm doing compressions, but he's turning blue. We're at 739 Ashgrove. Please, please. I swear to you, I could hear her counting out compressions in the background. 1, 2, 3, 4. The sound of sobbing layered over it. Melissa muttered, "Holy shit." We walked the perimeter of the lot, just to be sure. No foundation, no driveway, no remnants of a house. Just frozen dirt and scrub. The couple at 737 answered the door in their pajamas, bleary-eyed but polite. They'd lived there 6 years. They told us the lot next door had been empty the entire time. The husband thought maybe there used to be a house decades back. But if so, it was long gone. We knocked on 741 too. An elderly man answered, annoyed at being woken. He'd lived there since the late 80s. and he remembered the lot well. There used to be a place there, he said, pointing to the vacant patch. 2-story colonial, white siding, green shutters. Belonged to the Millers, Richard and Eleanor, nice enough people. But the place burned down in 2014. Both of them died in the fire. Tragic. Melissa and I just stood there, silent. Dispatch broke through the radio again. Panicked. The caller reports the patient has lost pulse. She's begging you to hurry, but there was no house. We eventually cleared the call as unable to locate. What else could we do? Melissa was pale as we drove back, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Neither of us spoke for a long time. We figured maybe it was some sick prank. But the next night proved otherwise. Exactly 11:47 p.m. Dispatch toned us out again. Same address, 739 Ash Grove. Same caller, Eleanor Miller. This time she was reporting possible stroke symptoms. Richard's speech slurred, left side weakness. Engine 12 responded with us. Their captain, a guy named Daniel, had been on the job for 20 years. When we all arrived at the vacant lot, his face went tight. He remembered the fire. He'd fought it, said they'd found the couple's bodies in the upstairs bedroom. Carbon monoxide poisoning, they were likely asleep before the flames reached them. But here we were, years later, listening to Eleanor Miller calmly describe textbook stroke symptoms in real time, begging for help at a house that hadn't existed in almost a decade. The fire crew stood there with us in the freezing dark, while dispatch relayed every detail of her call. Even the way she spoke, steady, panicked but precise, was exactly how a real spouse would describe an emergency. When we returned to the station, the chief had IT pull phone records. The call originated from a landline number disconnected since 2014, and yet it had gone through as a verified 911 call. Over the next week, it kept happening. Every night right around 11:47 p.m., Eleanor Miller called 911. The emergencies varied: chest pain, diabetic emergency, asthma attack, seizure. Always Richard. Always a desperate detail. Always medically accurate. By the 7th night, people were cracking under the stress. Janet, the night dispatcher, transferred to days because she couldn't handle hearing Eleanor's voice anymore. Melissa started calling in sick, saying she couldn't keep driving to an empty lot just to hear the sound of someone dying in a house that wasn't there. Me, I couldn't stay away. Something about it gnawed at me. Every detail Eleanor gave matched perfectly with the Millers' actual medical history. Dispatch pulled old records. Richard had diabetes, had a bad heart, had asthma. Eleanor was listed as his emergency contact. It was like we were reliving every emergency they'd ever had. And every night, it ended the same way, with Eleanor crying, begging us to hurry, then the line cutting out. On the 14th night, Dr. Patel, our medical director, had the idea to pull the original 911 recordings from January 2014, the night of the fire. We sat in the training room. The whole shift crowded around while IT replayed the archived tapes. The first call had come at 11:47 p.m. Eleanor reported Richard having chest pain. The second call, 15 minutes later, she was doing CPR. And the third, cut short by coughing, was Eleanor saying something about smoke. Then silence. The fire department had been dispatched separately by a neighbor who saw flames. By then, it was too late. And here's the kicker. The calls we'd been getting in 2021 were nearly word-for-word identical to those 2014 calls, as if Eleanor was still trying to finish what she'd started that night. It went on for a full 30 nights, always at the same time, always Eleanor's voice. Then, on the 30th night, March 11th, something changed. At 11:47 p.m., our radios crackled to life. Eleanor's voice came through again, weak this time, hoarse with coughing. Smoke in the house. Richard isn't moving. I can't breathe. We all froze. This was the third call, the one that never fully transmitted back in 2014. Through the static, we heard her say, "We should have gone to the hospital. Tell them we should have gone." Then nothing, just dead air. And after that night, the calls stopped. The city eventually put up a small memorial plaque on the empty lot, in memory of Richard and Eleanor Miller, who perished in January 2014. I still work as a medic, but I only do days now. Melissa retired early. She said after hearing Eleanor's voice night after night, she couldn't stomach another late shift. Official reports list the whole thing as technical anomaly. No explanation, no proof, just another piece of paperwork filed away. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw, or rather, what I didn't see. standing in front of that vacant lot while a woman begged me to save her husband's life. And sometimes, even now, I check the clock around 11:47 p.m., expecting the tones to drop, waiting to hear Eleanor Miller's voice one more time. It never comes. But every once in a while, when I drive past Ashgrove Lane, I swear I see tire marks on the shoulder in front of that empty lot, like an ambulance had just been there, like someone had stopped, like maybe Eleanor finally got through.